Over here. It's another short video. Today, what we're going to talk about is quotations. So we're going to continue with quotations, and we're going to talk about the P.I.E method. So let's just jump into it. So the P.I.E method is one way to incorporate quotes. And in class, we talked about orphan quotes and dropped quotes and those sorts of things that Trimble lists in his quoting chapter. And of course, over the weekend, you're going to read Annoying Way People Use Sources, the short article. So P.I.E is an acronym, and it's an acronym for a way to organize a paragraph, and it connects with the general idea of what should really happen in a paragraph. So it stands for point, illustration or information, and explanation. And kind of in class, I talked about this, sort of layered method, and sometimes we think of it as like a quote sandwich where you introduce something and then the filling, right? So one piece of bread is the introduction, the filling is the quote, and then the second piece of bread is the follow-up. So the point is the focus of your paragraph, and I really like to think about it kind of like a topic sentence or mini claim. And again, kind of think about a topic sentence kind of serves as a signpost that directs your audience back to what you will be discussing, the paragraph that follows. So that point paragraph, or the point sentence, should be pretty clear and pretty direct. The illustration or information is the piece of evidence that backs up the point. It's generally going to be a quote or a fact. It's going to be something clear and concrete. It doesn't have to be a direct quote. It could be a paraphrase or a summary. But for our purposes, we're going to look at just using a direct quote. And then, so the last piece of P.I.E, so you have your point, your illustration, so then we need the explanation. The explanation is really the thing that connects the two. So if we think back to Toulmin, is what Toulmin would call the warrant, right? So the P part of this, the point, is similar to what Toulmin calls a claim, and the evidence is the same thing as the illustration. And then here we have the explanation, which is again what Toulmin would call a warrant. So let's put this into practice. So let's say that I want to craft the following point, that Offred is able to maintain hope by believing that at some point she will no longer be a handmaid. That's my point, that's my claim. I found a little quote here that supports that claim. I would like to believe that this is a story I'm telling. I need to believe it. I must believe it. Those who can believe such stories are only stories have a better chance. So now I have that, right? If I left it there, what I would be missing would be the explanation, right? So how, showing again that warrant or how the two connect. Here, Offred is reminding herself of the power of stories. All she has is the power to tell stories, because everything else she has been taken away from her. If she has stories that she can believe, then she has hope to survive. So now I've got the point, the illustration, and the explanation. So let's kind of look at another way that this could work, that we can put these things together. So you're going to be doing the same thing basically for quotation exercise number 3. So in this case, you're going to choose a quote. So we're going to be doing a little bit out of order. So here's the quote that I found. Quote, by personalizing dramatic encounters with the potential emergent future, these stories create gripping and engaging images of what the world can or will be. Okay, so now I have my quote. What does that quote tell me? So I'm going to kind of interpret that a little bit. I'm going to say that this quote tells me that apocalyptic narratives draw a reader into a story by creating a personal connection to individual characters. Okay, so now I have my importance. And now I'm going to figure out how they relate. So again, this is the warrant part, as Toulmin would call it, or the explanation in terms of the P.I.E method. So I'm going to say it connects to my thesis, because my thesis is essentially that we like apocalyptic narratives because they allow us to investigate possible futures or alternate worlds. And this quote shows that we like to put ourselves in the shoes of those survivors. So now I've got all my basic steps, and I can actually take all that information and bring it together. So dystopian and apocalyptic narratives draw a reader into the story by creating a personal connection to individual characters. There's my P, there's my claim. According to Clarity, this is accomplished, quote, by personalizing dramatic encounters with potential emergent future. These stories create gripping and engaging images of what the world can or will be. So there's just my quote or my evidence in the blue there. As a result of the personal investment that readers feel towards the characters in these narratives, readers are compelled to envision a not too distant future in which they themselves might be engaged in similar scenarios, right? So again, if you look back and you look at the first sentence and the quote, those are pretty similar to what I had. All I've really changed is the connection to the thesis. And so if you look, a lot of students will, well, not a lot, but some students will occasionally have two quotes really, really close to each other. And the downside there is that you don't have enough space or time to explain or examine those quotes. So for the quotation exercise, for quotation exercise number 3, the third and final quotation exercise, you're going to go through this process twice. All right, so you're going to pick 2 quotes from your list of quotes from your stockpiled information. You're going to figure out what your point is, right? What are you trying to prove? You're going to include the evidence, and then you're going to figure out how that evidence supports your claim. Now, best case scenario, you're going to go ahead and you're going to use these in your essay, and so that little unit of evidence is already good to go and ready to chunk into your paragraph. Worst case scenario, what you've done is you've practiced this method of looking at how to include evidence and how to incorporate it thoroughly into an essay. I would add a couple additional notes. I would generally avoid using the words "this quote shows that" or "this quote means that." Usually unnecessary and can sound and feel a little bit disjointed. Avoid personal opinion and or bias, right? There's probably going to be some bias in there because that's inevitable, but you should try and avoid it as much as possible. And avoid simply restating the quote in your own words, right? Your goal is not to restate the quote, it is to explain how the quote connects to your topic sentence and your thesis, right? So these 3 mistakes are kind of, to me, weak writing. And weak writing, as it says here, comes from either not knowing what you want to say and or assuming that the reader can read your mind. So as you go through these exercises and as you look at your quotes, really remember that it's incorporating information. And as we talked about in class, if you want to use a longer quote, you want to use sort of a block quote, this process gets even more pronounced because you don't want to just drop your reader into this massive quote that they may skip over. You want to make sure that they fully understand the importance of it. Remember again that quote isn't there just because it's something that's nice to have. The quote is really a piece of evidence, as Trimble has shown us in the quoting and middles chapters, that the evidence is used in a way like a lawyer uses evidence, right? Which is to prove a point. And we also briefly talked about in class how all of these things should build on each other. So each paragraph should advance your argument, should build it. So you might start out at a relatively basic place and move to a more and more sophisticated place. One way that I've seen students do this is to take the first part of the paper to establish the problem and establish why it's a problem that needs to be addressed, and then go into how that problem can be solved. Now, it depends on your overall strategy, and so that's something that I want you to be thinking about as well, and especially as you get into the 0 draft or outline assignment, right? So how do you want to approach it? So we'll pick this up a little bit more on Monday when we talk about that annoying ways people use sources article. In the meantime, you do have the 0 draft we continue to work on, and the more that you can start to incorporate quotes and evidence into that, the better. And one other quick thing that I do want to cover. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about additional sources. So there are any other number of things that you could include, whereas the academic articles that you found, those quotes and things, are fantastic, but you're not limited to those academic or popular sources that are traditional written pieces, right? You can also include things like YouTube videos, podcasts, TEDTalks, images, charts, and graphs. So there are a lot of other things that you can bring to bear, right? So let's talk just briefly about the advantages and disadvantages of things like TED Talks, YouTube, and podcasts. So they do sort of provide fun new information. They are probably easier for us to pay attention to, maybe easier to understand, and maybe even easier to cite, right? Again, if you use TED Talks, you can always find that direct transcript. The cons, or like the downside, you do have to be really careful about reliability, accuracy, bias, and oversimplification. Something like TED Talks is fantastic and pretty reliable, in my opinion. I've never run into a problem. But YouTube, definitely. Any old fool can make a YouTube video, and if I can do it, anybody can. And podcasts are kind of the same thing. In terms of providing information that is really digestible and easy for a reader, sometimes a chart, a graph, or an image can be really helpful, especially if there's a lot of information, a lot of numbers, as you can see in my chart here, that it would be hard to explain or summarize. A couple things to remember, right? Because just like anything else, some students decide, oh, hey, great, charts and graphs, I can throw those in and be good with my page length. It's not actually the case. So as far as I'm concerned, those charts and graphs do not count towards your final page length. They should help explain or enhance your argument, and you really should think of those charts, graphs, other images in the same way that you think of a block quote. You need to provide as much introduction and as much explanation as you would for a block quote. And you should make sure that there is a clear reason to include the graph other than it looks neat or it looks professional. So make sure that there's a clear reason. You're going to want to spend some time talking about a graph or a chart because you're going to be directing your reader's attention away from your writing, right? So some tips and suggestions. Always use the highest quality image that you can find. If it's blurry, hazy, grainy, your reader is not going to be able to make sense of it. Always verify the information in the image. Make sure that it is accurate. Place the chart or graph near the text that it relates to. You're going to align it flush with the left-hand margin. Maintain regular spacing. And do use a reasonable size. It doesn't need to be gigantic, but it does need to be, again, legible. So just really quickly, here's what it would look like. So your in-text reference, and this is all from Purdue OWL, by the way, so you can go and you can look at how they do it as well if you want a second reference. So your in-text reference is going to look like so, right? See table 1, right? I've got all this information above, and then in parentheses, see table 1. Above table 1, I'm going to have a little bit of a caption that explains what the chart or table is of. And then at the bottom is where I'm going to include this source there at the bottom. Couple quick reminders: when you're labeling charts or graphs, tables, just label them as table 1, figure 1, something like that. You're going to include that short caption that describes the table. You're going to include the MLA citation for the source immediately after the source. And unless the figure or table comes from a source already cited in your works cited, you're going to need to create a separate citation. So in other words, if that chart, table, graph is in some article that you're already quoting from, then you're good. If it is not, then you'll need to create a separate citation. TED Talks are pretty easy to cite. Some of you have maybe seen TED Talks before. They're academic type lectures that are on any range of subjects. So pretty straightforward, follows essentially the same format as anything else that we've done in MLA. So we've got the author's last name, first name, the title of the talk, TED, the date it was given, and then at the end, lecture. YouTube videos, again, I'll repeat, make sure that it's nice and reliable, and once you deem it accurate and reliable, use the following format. So that's the author or whoever uploaded it, the title of the video, online video clip, YouTube, the date, and so on. Now, in terms of when or how to use those things, entirely up to you. TED Talks I find helpful. Again, they can be great sources of additional information and sometimes worded in a way that's more easily digestible. TED Talks, YouTube videos, podcasts do all count as popular sources, not academic sources. unless you have a real specific reason to claim that it's an academic source. And if you do, stop by and visit me during office hours or shoot me an email just to double check. All right? So, lots of possibilities, and especially now that we've got the research project behind us with your 5 academic sources, you can branch out and you can find some more interesting and dynamic ways to incorporate evidence. All right. Have questions, you have concerns or recipes or jokes or memes, go ahead and email me or stop by during office hours. Otherwise, I'll see you in class.